Welcome to my Aether Raids offense tier list, guys. So I've kind of done some digging, and I don't think that this is something that's really consolidated out there very well. I know a lot of people struggle on offense, so I figured I'd cover sort of the best units and the best methods to use when playing on offense. So just as a little heads up before I dive into the tier list, I've been using a lot of these methods myself. I've also known a lot of friends who are in top tier of Aether Raids, so I kind of gathered a little group and we got together and we sat down for 3 hours and we hashed out this tier list to discuss it, and this is what we came up with. So before I dive into it, I'm going to set a few disclaimers or ground rules because I know if I don't, a lot of people are going to complain and throw a fit. So, number one, this tier list is not gospel. It's my opinion and the opinion of a group of other high-level Tier 21 players who have been up in Tier 21 of Aether Raids for quite a while now. And we really have all of us used these specific tactics in practice, so they are tried and tested. And they work, and they still work until now, even with all the meta changes that Aether Raids has gone through. Number two is, since it's impossible to cover all of the 360 plus units that are in the game in a smallish or at least reasonable time frame, I'm going to be using the best characters for these specific roles. Now, it doesn't mean that other characters are not going to work, it's just that they're less optimal. So feel free to use your own judgment, compare your own units that you think might fit in with the same class, look at their stats of the units we're listing, look at the stats of your unit and see if they work. Honestly, if you're 1 to 2 stats off in a specific area, I don't think it's going to be that big. For example, I'm going to cover Blade Tome Mages down the line. Really, like 34 attack versus 36 attack on a fully buffed Blade Tome Mage. Not going to make that big of a difference. So, if you want to use someone over someone else, go for it. This is just optimized for like the best use. Rule number 3 is, or disclaimer number 3, these are not the only ways you can win in Aether Raids. These are just the ones that I'm familiar with and that my other friends are familiar with and that we compiled. Now, we can get into a ton of other tactics, to be honest, like we can cover Reinhardt, Bolin, and Dancers, like they definitely clear Aether Raids, but we don't use those. And these are the mechanisms that we use to get to Tier 21, and they're very consistent and they perform very well. So that's what we're going to talk about. And last but not least, rule number 4, and this is gospel, is air is not on this list because air is tier SSS, triple plus, however you want to rank it, unless you're a defense and offense god. You're pretty much forced to use her on tier 21. And honestly, if you're a defense and offense god, then you don't really need my tier list anyways, so I don't know. You're probably going to disagree with me on everything, but yeah, anyways, let's move on to the tier list. So I'm going to start off with the method that I'm most familiar with, and that is the Omega Tanks subset. So we're splitting this tier list into 4 different sections. And the first section is going to talk about tanking in Aether Raids. And so let's look at this. Let's look at the best tanks. Let's start with the best ones. And so in S tier, we have, I suppose before we rank anyone, I should take a step back and say how we're ranking people in S tier and then downwards. So there's a few different methods that we took into consideration while we were ranking units. And I think number 1 is quote-unquote free-to-play friendly, or to use other terms is this unit easily available? And I think that's most important because you really don't want us ranking some rare legendary unit in S tier who takes a ton of orbs to get and who's not very accessible. And so we took that into consideration, and we're ranking units that are more easily available, more free-to-play friendly, not free-to-play only, and we ranked those mostly ahead of the bunch. Other units that were also ranked were units that are absolutely stellar at performing specific roles, even if they are 5-star locked or Grand Hero Battle locked. And Grand Hero Battle locked, you still get the unit for free, you can't get the high merges, and then the 5-star units that we ranked are still very useful if they are unmerged, or some of them were given out for free. Air, for example, who we didn't rank, but she's a no-brainer. Anyways, so that's a little bit of a debrief on how we ranked units. So now let's dive into it. So in S tier for tanks, we're starting off with Gwendolyn. And I'm going to put a brief explanation about why every unit is a little bit good. So Gwendolyn is a blue armored unit, which means she automatically has great, fantastic base stats. But the reason Gwendolyn is up here is she's 3 to 4 star available, she's been here since launch, and she has excellent defensive and resistance stats. And so she can really take Omega tanking to a new level. And one of the set that I run personally, I run it on Brave Hector, who you guys might have heard of. But Gwendolyn is basically Brave Hector with less attack. And so her defenses really, even if he's plus 10 and she's plus 10, are very compatible, are very comparable. And so Gwendolyn could run Berkut's Lance in the A slot for an insane boost in resistance, or even Casablanca if you're having trouble with all those buffed Blade Tome mages and Rally Traps and Aether raids. And so those are the two lances that would be very good. Distant Counter has to be run in the A slot in an Omega tank. That's a no-brainer. And you really want Vengeful Fighter in the B slot so that you can kill things relatively quicker and proc your specials quicker. In the C slot, it doesn't really matter. I've had a lot of success using Attack Smoke just because you can smite your tank in the middle of people, initiate, and smoke all the units around. It's less useful in a Rally Trap because they tend to get out of that debuff, but the C slot here is really quite flexible, and your seal really needs to be Distant Defense. That's the basis of the set. The special can be whatever you want. You can use Soul or you can use Aether. In the event of Gwendolyn, I think because her attack is a little bit lower, you might want to use Aether. She's not going to take that much damage, except against something like a fully buffed Blade Tome Nino, in which case, what the hell are you doing tanking her with a Gwendolyn? She might be able to tank it if you do the calculations, but yeah. So I don't want to keep rambling on, I want to move on because most of these are quite similar. So Sheena is next on the list, and she is literally green Gwendolyn. Now the only downside to Sheena is she doesn't have the equivalent of a Berkut's Lance to equip, and so she is going to be stuck equipping Hack-O-Lantern. And that kind of exposes her to instant special infantry pulse teams, but she's still got very solid bulk, very easy availability, plays the exact same role as Gwendolyn, can run the exact same set with Hack-O-Lantern. I mean, you can even potentially run Special Fighter and Quick Riposte in the seal slot if you really wanted to fire off some specials. Armors are very flexible, you can do whatever you want with them. Next to Sheena, as you see, is Surtur. I don't really have to explain this. An unmerged Surtur is basically Sheena, with a little bit better stats. He's incredible, and he runs the same set. You can run Hack-O-Lantern, DC Vengeful Fighter, and Distant Defense, and he's good to go. The next two people in S rank are also quite similar to each other in the case that they are both 3 to 4 star dragons. They've both got the trainee BST, so they've got high base stats, and likewise they've got balanced defenses, and that's Noe and Faye. Now, the nice thing about these dragons is their breaths are actually quite incredible because they can run DC in the breath slot, and that saves you an A slot to really run whatever you want, and so they can run something like Steady Breath or Warding Breath. I would probably recommend Warding Breath more if you have it because of the abundance of mages in Aether raids. They can also counter Lins that are running Sakei's Blessing if you happen to see that. They can also, in addition, run Null Sea Disrupt, which is huge in countering things like Brave Lin, again with double Poison Strike, which is quite common. And so these being infantry, but also having high base stats is really, really good and warrants them being an S rank, S tier. Now I really wanted to keep it that way because 4 out of the 5 of these units are very readily available. If you build one, if you got one to plus 10, you're pretty much good to go. You're set to get out there and set out on your path to tanking Aether raids. But I also want to go over a few more units that might be a little bit more unique or a little bit more common, or you might have in your arsenal. So, next up we've got A tier, and at the very top of A tier is actually Winter Cecilia. And her defenses are incredible as well. They're quite balanced, they're both over 30. She's a free unit, came at free as 5 star. Her only downside, and the reason she's not an S tier, is because she requires Grails to merge up. And you can only really get Grails through Aether raids. So, well, Forging Bonds I suppose, but that's not that good. So Winter Cecilia is up there, she's got great defenses. She can also run Close Counter. You can really do whatever you want with her. Daggers have gotten a ton of nice daggers, so sky's the limit with Winter Cecilia. It's basically the same as the ones above, except she's a ranged unit and she's still got really high base stats. I think she's at like 165, so most of the armors here on down are a very common theme. So next to Winter Cecilia is Effie. can basically run the same set as Gwendolyn. Brave Hector, also the same set as Gwendolyn, but runs it a little bit better. He's only here because he's 5-star ranked, 5-star locked. Harden, exact same thing, except he has a DC weapon, which can also free up an A slot. So if you've got a Harden, Harden works too. Now, legendary female Grima is an interesting one here because she's a flyer. However, she's got her Dragon Skin A slot, which is excellent, and Expiration is also DC. So between those and between her A slot also giving +4 defense and resistance, you've really got a stellar A slot, a DC breath in the weapon slot already, so you don't need to inherit anything. And then you can run whatever you want in the B slot, the C slot, and the Seal slot. And she's got very, very even stats throughout. She's quite speedy, so she's probably not getting doubled. So while she may not need the same defense as the others do because she's quite fast and she's avoiding doubles, she can still be quite the effective tank. Next legendary Grima is Erica. And now Erica is very interesting because a lot of people pre-Weapon Refinery knew her as sort of a buffer. But Erica, when you look at her more closely, actually has quite high stats. I think it's something like 26 defense and 28 resistance unmerged at a 5-star. If you merge her, that's 30-32 at +10. She's easily acquirable, and you can also have an IV in defense, and that's 35-34. She can run Null C, and her weapon is incredible. She's got bonus doubler on her weapon, and so that's, in addition to the visible buffs, it's another 6 invisible if you've got attack and resistance tactic on her. So, legendary Erica, man, people sleep on her. She's fantastic. Not legendary, sorry. Normal Erica. People are sleeping on her, but she's actually very, very good. Obviously needs to run distant counter in the A slot, but that's besides the point. Oboro and Donal are also up here because availability, but they also have very comparable defenses and resistances and are just kind of a step-down version of Gwendolyn that are infantry. They run the same set as well, minus the fact that they can't run something like Vengeful Fighter. That's only the real downside to them. Now, I'm sure you guys are wondering, why is Fair in the tank section of the Aether Raids tier list? I'll explain. So, Nameless Blade is incredible. I think it's something like it's a slaying blade that also has a wrath effect. So, Fair can run a 1 cooldown noontime special. So, and she's also got pretty good defenses and excellent resistance. She can run distant counter, she can run Null C Disrupt. So basically, you're hitting this girl, she's going to instantly whack you back with a noontime to recover HP and do a decent amount of damage. Even if you double her, which you won't because she's pretty quick, she's going to whack again with a noontime and heal. And so this is a unit that's getting a heal in every attack. That's quite powerful, so that's why she ranks up here in the tanks list. Of course, if you support her, she gets even more powerful, and she can run something like a Gale Force set as well, but for tanking purposes, noontime is probably the best. Now moving on to our B tier, which is a little bit less powerful, with units that are a little bit less available. Fjorm is a legendary with mixed defenses, also runs the same sets as the other blues. Zephiel is a little bit interesting here because his Ekisax sword has distant defense refine, so that also frees, you can run double distant defense, which beefs him up significantly and makes his resistance comparable to everyone else. Brave of Frame is interesting because Garm has that nice effect that lets you double all the time as long as you're buffed. But he's not as good as a tank. His resistance is a little bit lower than most others, but quite respectable. The only reason he's up here is because he was a Choose Your Legends unit, and so a lot of people might have him. Legendary Hector speaks for himself, and the fact that he also has Ostian Pulse is massive. So not only does he play a good tank role on a team, but he can also play a little bit of a support role here. Legendary Tiki, same reason as the rest of the blue armors, she's just got a fantastic bulky stat spread, and like dragons, she can run Lightning Breath if you really wanted to, although you probably don't have to. Adult Tiki is also quite good. She's a little bit step lower than the rest of the other ones, and honestly, that's just because blues are such a huge threat in Aether Raids. If blues were not such a big threat in Aether Raids, Adult Tiki would probably be up a little bit higher. Myr is here in B tier because of availability, but she's also a very solid tank. She also flies, which in the current Aether Raids meta, where you see a lot of Bolin running around, you're probably going to have to waste your seal slot on Iotes, which you don't really want to do, and that's why she kind of ranks lower than female Grima. Otherwise, she'd be insane. and she actually still is quite a good Omega tank, even while wasting her seal slot. Roy is also on here because Roy has very balanced defense and resistance. He's got quick riposte 5 on his binding blade, as well as I think defense and resistance +4. It's an excellent weapon, but he's also down here because he's red and he's a little bit slower, but not bad. Hawkeye and Libra actually might be a little bit of a surprise for you to see here. I have them both here together because Hawkeye, while more readily available, I think a lot less people use him. He's also a lot slower than Libra, so if you've got Libra, who's got basically the same defenses and resistance, I think the same attack, he's got a ton more speed, and he's got a lot lower HP, but does HP really matter when you're not getting doubled? That's kind of a toss-up to say, right? But they can also run something like a Poleaxe, Null-C Disrupt, and then Distant Defense in the seal slot, and they're good to go, really. They'll kill all those pesky horse teams that you see. If you don't run into horse teams that much, well, you can run something like a Hack-O-Lantern, I guess. But Axis really gets shafted in general in Fire Emblem Heroes. Now, onto our C tier, and these are units that, if heavily invested in, can actually do quite well. Julius is here because his tome is a -6 in attack to everything, and his resistance is ridiculous. So all you really have to worry about is physical stuff, and honestly, he can kind of shrug that off too, but his defense is really, really low, and he's still at risk of getting nailed by some very common meta counters like Est or Catria these days, or any real physical blue that you see. Sophia, same thing, has quite good defenses, but really low speed. She's honestly quite underwhelming, and red tomes really don't have that good of a selection, so compared to Julius, I think she's actually a little bit worse, but they're still down in C tier. Now, the only reason Faye is in C tier is because she's not that common, she's 5-star locked, and most people have already foddered her off for her Fire Sweep Bow to give to Brave Lynn. But if you're one of those few people who happens to have a +10 Faye and wants to run something like a Guard Bow CC Vantage set, or you know, a full tank set on Faye, this girl's got incredible defenses. She'll range tank the hell out of everything. All those pesky infantry pulse mage teams you see, no problem, she's gonna eat them alive. And now to round out the list, in D tier, I felt like we had to put Drog and Duma, both characters whose names start with D, into D tier just by virtue of Drog being a 3 to 4-star readily available armor, but his resistance is absolute garbage, slightly compensated by Barrier Blade, but honestly, red really is one of the worst types to tank with an Aether raid, so I don't know if you really want to be doing that, so he's the bottom of the barrel here. Duma is just a bad tank. He's common, he's a bonus unit sometimes on offense, so I put him on here, but his defenses are like low 30s both combined, like that's not great. Anyone else on this list can probably do Duma's job better. So that rounds off our tanks list. If any of you guys have any questions or any difference in opinions, leave them in the comments. But now we're going to move on to the next part of the list. So the next part is slightly shorter. Our tanks part is going to be the longest part, and I hope we can get through the rest very quick. But our next part on the list is the Vantage units. Now, Vantage only has 3 tiers, S, A, and B. And that's because most of the units that can use Vantage are quite interchangeable. So I limited it to some very, very unique units in this tier. So at the top of the tier, you're going to see Keaton and Swordheart, who both do the same thing. They've got brave weapons that work on enemy phase as well. So give these guys distant counter, give them Vantage, and get them into Vantage range and watch them go to town. They will shred stuff. Add something in the seal slot like a Fierce Stance, then you've got 6 more attack, buff them. Keaton is insanely better than Swordheart, but they're both up here at the top of the list just by virtue of what they can do. They'll rip teams apart easily. Now the rest of the 4 in this tier should look quite similar to you. Jenny, Mikoto, Lucius, and Lachesis. These 4 are all healers, and you're probably sitting here thinking, really? Using healers on offense? Well, if I learned one thing from MMM, who happens to use a +10 Jenny now after a long history of trying to pull for her, and who was the only person to make it into tier 21, the first and only person who's up there for 2 weeks on his own, and he did it with a Jenny with this very CC and Vantage set. And so they usually go with Pain Plus as a staff with Wrathful Refine, Close Counter, Vantage, and double Savage Blow. I mean, you initiate on the enemy, you spray them with a bunch of AoE damage, you dance your healer, you initiate again, and you spray them, and you just shave off the rest of their HP with splash damage, and then you kind of just stand there and laugh as everyone kind of suicides on you, because they've got low HP and you just Vantage nope them. And that applies across all 4 healers. All of them can do this quite well. Lucius and Lachesis are a little bit more common. Mikoto and Jenny both have the highest staff attack. So anyone can do this. It's really quite simple. They run into a little bit of issues if there's someone on the team with Hardy Bearing or some Fire Sweep weapons, but that's why you've got 5 slots on your team. You can run something else to take care of that. Now let's move on to the next tier of Vantage, which hits really hard, but is not as brain dead as the rest of them, or not as simple as the rest of them. So Ares, I don't think I have to really explain why Ares is up here so high. He just cycles specials and destroys enemies. His damage output's insane. He's a little bit more difficult to set up because he requires you to get to specials first. So if you're supported by something like a Valoria, or you've got some special support sets running on him, he's really, really good. And the rest of the 4 on this list are all Blade Tome units. Levitain using the Blade Tome Blade, and Lilina, Ophelia, and Nino using normal Blade Tomes. I don't really have to explain this. You buff the unit, you get them into Vantage range, and then everything else also suicides on them. I'm not going to cover any other mages, like I said in my introduction. Lilina, Ophelia, and Nino are up here because... Lilina and Nino are mostly up here because of availability. Lilina also, I think, has the highest attack among red mages, so that's why she's up here. Ophelia is up here because she's not only very good at running the Blade Tome close counter Vantage set, but her tome itself is also quite good, where she can run like an AoE to shave off a bunch of enemy HP. So her flexibility brings her up here. You can replace her with any other blue Blade Tome mage, but if you've got an Ophelia, she's also got one of the highest attacks out of a Blade Tome mage, and I think she's been on banners relatively recently, so that's why she gets to be an A tier. A tier a little bit lower, and I don't know, maybe Jafar should be a little bit higher. I recently watched Bisquick's video about using Jafar in Aether Raid, so if you haven't seen that, go check that out. I'll leave a link in the description below. But Jafar basically can do the same thing that the healers up top can do, and he can just spray AoE damage like it's nobody else's business. So maybe he's unfairly in B tier, but I feel like a lot of people don't have Jafar, never pulled for Jafar, don't care much for Jafar. He's also got very low attack. But Jafar is excellent with his Refine. He definitely works at running this. Soleil kind of works as well, just because her attack is ridiculous. Micaiah is up here solely because of Thani. Thani takes care of your armors and takes care of your horses, which are 2 of the most common seen types in Aether raids. So she's got that 1.5 times damage to really not pull any punches. She's just knocking things out left and right, so she's really notable. In B tier only because 5-star locked. Leon and Fallen Takumi are here by virtue of Flyer meta being an ascending meta in Aether raids. They're the most tricky teams to deal with, and so having an archer who's available like Leon, or who can, shoot some AoE damage as well by himself on a turn like Fallen Takumi is also very good. They can run these sets, but they're on the lower end and much less effective. So I hope that kind of summarizes how Vantage plays out, and if you have any of these units, I definitely recommend building them. This strategy works, and it's got very few weaknesses like Hardy Bearing or Fire Sweep weapons, which you should be able to cover with units on the rest of your team. Now, let's get into a little bit more of a bold one in the Gale Force tier list. Now, this tier list is minuscule, and I'm talking like 3 to 4 units in each tier, 4 tiers, that's it. And so S tier, we're going to start out with someone that people might have been sleeping on, and that's Navarre. Navarre recently got a Refine in his Scarlet Sword that not only is a slaying weapon, so he already has a lower cooldown on his specials, but it also gives him -2 cooldown on the first turn. So Navarre, if you use Gale Force, is starting off with a 2 cooldown Gale Force. He doesn't even need to run anything like Flashing Blade or Heavy Blade for this. As long as he doubles and your enemy isn't running guard, there you go, that's your Gale Force right there. I guess I should also talk about how these strats are usually conducted. I might do a video to more deeply cover how the strategies are run, but in essence, in a nutshell, the way Gale Force works is usually you smite your Gale Force unit in, or you get them in however you want to get them in, You proc your Gale Force, you either kill the threatening unit, the most threatening unit, so in the case of Navarre, you'd be killing Ophelia, if she's the most threatening blue, or whatever other blue is in there. And then you either run out, or you should be able to kill another unit and tank the rest, get into Wings of Mercy range and get a Dancer and go back in again. So it's really quite flexible depending on how you play it. And so Navarre does that very well. He's kind of the prototype red sword user. Anyone who compares to Navarre can probably do it, but because of his PRF sword, he's really standing out in that department. Another unit who's up there in S tier is Naesala. Naesala is a free Grand Hero Battle unit. Now, he's a little bit less effective because he can't run Flashing Blade, which kind of stings. Heavy Blade still does the job up here. He's going to be running a 5 cooldown Gale Force, but he's got 3 movement if you're proccing him as a Laguz, and he was free. And so I think, and his personal weapon is also very good in that it gives him up to 7 pure unmitigated damage to an enemy. So he can take out enemies and do a lot of damage. Don't sleep on Naesala. Eliwood is also up here because of his new refine. He's just got ridiculous offensive boosts on his weapons. So an invested in Eliwood with 3 movement, I mean, do I really gotta explain this one? Pretty much the same as Navarre, except without the cooldown buffs, and he can use Heavy Blade, so he's quite simple. Moving on to A tier, we've got Legendary Ephraim, and I think everyone knows why is because he's got guaranteed doubles and he's got quite high attack, so anything running Heavy Blade, Legendary Ephraim. He's fallen off a little bit lately in Aether raids just because a lot of mages are there, and if you're attacking mages or you're killing in one shot, he can't proc it off. Legendary Erica, also up here for pretty much the same reason. Brave Celica is up here because she can quad, although she's not that good as a Gale Force unit, but for what it's worth, she's got an easy quad. And so if you're quadding anything, you're probably getting Gale Force off. And Tibarn is up here, because I feel like a lot of people pulled for Tibarn. His weapon is also a guaranteed double. However, I've been notified that his attack is a little bit too high. So he suffers from sometimes one-shotting things that he would otherwise not want to one-shot, and get into trouble really cycling through into that Gale Force. But otherwise, he's pretty much the same as Naesala. In B tier, we've got Rutger, Raven, and Oscar, and these kind of all are functioning as your prototypical, sword, axe, and lance unit, who are both fast and can hit hard enough to cycle through Gale Force quick enough. They're also readily available, Rutger being free, and Raven and Oscar being 3 to 4 star availability. And down in C tier, which is actually a true C tier because we're looking at Cherche, Claire, Sheeta, and Cordelia, all whose names start with C, who are all notable Gale Force, but not as optimal, but are pretty much quite available. And so I just put them in because you can substitute these in and use them as well. Alright, now we get to our last category, and this is my favorite category to talk about, and this is the support category. These units should not directly be engaged in combat. Ever. They can, some of them are quite good at it, but they really shouldn't be. And this is where all your dancers and your buffers go. Now, this one's a little bit interesting, so hear me out, okay? So we're going to dive straight into S tier, and you're going to see at the very top of S tier is Kaden. Now, for anyone who hasn't watched my Kaden video, go check that out. You'll see exactly why his weapon just is drive buffs and it gives a ton of stats. And he's very flexible, he's a 3 movement horse unit, he covers the entire map. His only weakness is he can kind of get ployed by a panic manner, panic ployed, and so that'll remove his buffs, so you gotta watch out for that. But other than that, he's pretty brainless. He's 5-star locked, which is unfortunate, but he is above and beyond the best support unit in the game. Next to him is Valoria. I don't think I need to explain this one either. She just completely removes the burden of having to lower your cooldowns on your specials, and that synchronizing that with something like a Gale Force team is just disgusting. So Valoria is an excellent, excellent support. And now the only dancer in S tier, and I'm going to explain this one a little bit in depth, is Rayson. Now, the reason I chose Rayson for S tier, and the reason Legendary Azura is not up here, is because 1, you can bless Rayson. Giving blessings is the core foundations of scoring well in Aether raids, and unfortunately Legendary Azura, being a legendary unit, cannot be blessed with a light or an Astra blessing. And because of that, Rayson really here takes the cake. He can have 3 movement, and he's a dancer, and his weapon heals. And so I think that stands him above and beyond any other dancer in the entire game And he's also available at 4-star, so you can actually merge him up and make him a semi-viable combat unit if you really wanted to. So that's why Raisin is an S tier. Also an S tier is Witchy Wand. Witchy Wand gets rid of specials. So if you're really fed up with all these infantry pulse teams, just poke one with a Witchy Wand. The weapon is fantastic, and there you go, problem solved. Easy solution. The weapon is really that good, and it's also coming up in the legendary banner that is, depending on the time of this video, now or just came out in the past, or it's going on. So that's the S tier in support. The rest of the supports are a tier below. They're also very good. Male Corrin is basically Caden, except he doesn't buff everyone. He only buffs the supported unit, but he will, because he's supported, give +5s and drive buffs. Very, very solid support. If you don't have Caden, build a Male Corrin, refine his weapon. That's all he needs. You don't need much investment. Stick Triangle Adept on him so that he can block greens, and just put him close to your Omega tank of choice. Easy. Build Male Corrin if you don't have Caden. I cannot stress this enough. Use him. He's good. Legendary Azura is here in A tier because on the weeks where she does synchronize with whatever bonus is going on, she's amazing. By far the best dancer. She's only here because she's inconsistently in the bonus rotation. And now that we actually didn't get an Astra hero, I think maybe she warrants being an S tier, because whenever it's an Astra week, you should be using Legendary Azura over Raisin, because blessings don't work there. Next to Legendary Azura is regular Olivia. Regular Olivia is very useful if you're running into a lot of Surters or armors on defense. She can run Armor Smasher, Triangle Adept, and Dance all at the same time. She's readily available at 3 to 4 star. She's been here since launch. Everyone should have an Olivia, especially if you're following Phoenix Master 1 guides. You've got to have an Olivia. Loki is also on here because she is literally the definition of a walking panic manner. She can completely disable an entire column of an enemy's team and really render them quite useless and limit what they can do. Not very consistent, otherwise not a very powerful unit. She could probably run a close counter Vantage set, but she's also 5-star locked. I think A tier is very fair here for support. And Aversa is a no-brainer. She's only in A tier now because a lot of people have started spreading out their units and figuring out defensive spreads to counter Aversa's presence in Aether raids. But otherwise, she's still a stellar unit to use on offense if you're really struggling with a lot of teams that buff units and stuff like that. And in B tier is Ninian. The reason Ninian is unique and notable is because she's a dancer. And she's got very high HP for an infantry unit, meaning you can utilize her in infantry pulse teams without really needing much investment than giving her that pulse on the C slot. And we're skipping C tier and substituting it with D tier here, and we're calling that D tier Dance. Basically, any other dancer is viable in the support category. There really is no bad dancer. All of them are useful. So, that's my lecture on Aether Raid's offensive team compositions and the tier list. Now, I can eventually go through these individually in terms of every tactic and how it's played, more so in depth in their own video. If you guys need more of a demonstration or sort of a visual application, I can totally reach out to some of the more notable names who use these strategies. I know for sure I'm going to be showcasing a bunch of Brave Hector tanking videos for people to follow if they're interested in following the tank strategy, and I can easily grab some Vantage and Gale Force footage and explain that and how that works in some subsequent videos. So if you'd like to see that, stay tuned, monitor the channel for some more. And that's the offense tier list. If you disagree with me, feel free to let me know in the comments section. If you've got anything that you think I've missed, definitely reach out to me and let me know in the comments section. I really want to hear this. I want to explore and see what options everyone else is using in Aether Raids to succeed. So with that being said, I think this video is already very long and does not need to be any longer. So this is LinkKing7 signing out, and best of luck to you guys in Aether Raids. Peace.